Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. You know, history is something that I'm trying to bring it with one of the best historians that I know. I say he's second to none. But look, we're going to talk about the sweet science. If you don't know what the sweet science is, you're going to find out right now.
Hello, family. How you doing? As usual, we're going to start by just making one comment from my last post, which was about taxes. We wanted to say the Federal Bank and Reserve met in Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, November 22nd, 1910. They felt it was a good luck day. And then November 22nd, 56 years later, 1963 is when they, or 53 years later, is when they had a hand in assassinating President Kennedy. Now, let's go with boxing today. We're going to talk about the sweet science. You know, our people, Judites or so-called black people, were kept out of boxing for a very long time. Jack Johnson was the first of our champions. He had to go all the way to Sydney, Australia to win the championship. What was that, December 26th, I believe it was? 26th, I believe it was, 1908, when he knocked out Burns, a Canadian fighter, who actually gave him a shot at the title. No one in America would, but he finally got a title shot there. What happened next was he came back, and people were so upset that a black man was, a so-called black man was the champ, that they got Jim Jeffries, who is a celery farmer at Glendale, California. And he and his brother were fighters. He was undefeated champ, Jim Jeffries. Matter of fact, Jack Johnson fought his brother in downtown Los Angeles in 1903, 1902, 1903, I think it was 1903. And while he was whooping his brother's behind, he leaned over the ropes and said to the champ, Jim Jeffries at the time, who was champ at that time, he said, "I could beat you tonight too." He could have beat both them boys in the same night. Now, I'm going to bring some up later about that when we get to Muhammad Ali. Now, what happened was, in July 4th, 1910, was the first battle of the century. They bought Jim Jeffries out of retirement. He lost an incredible amount of weight. He had blown up to about 300 pounds after he had retired. He got in fighting condition, and they had to fight. Initially, it was going to be in San Francisco, but then the governor intervened, and they had to move it out of state, so they fought in Reno, Nevada, July 4th, 1910. Jack Johnson humiliated him. And Jeffries said, honestly, after the fight, I couldn't have beaten Jack Johnson even in my prime. He's a much better fighter than I ever was. So that was good. And of course, black folks, all the so-called black folks all over the country pissed white folks off when they used to go and order their breakfast after that fight and say, "Give me 2 eggs, make them all runny and beat up like old Jim Jeffries, and make my coffee strong and black like Jack Johnson." This is how they used to say it. This was one of the biggest period of race riots in this country was because of that fight. Right after that fight, starting the night of July 4th, 1910, you can look all that up. Jack Johnson was a champ. He was caught on the Mann Act. He had a white wife, which, you know, people can do what they want, I suppose, but we promote strong black family. A black man should be with a black woman, having strong black children. But Jack Johnson didn't see it that way. He was son of slaves, and I guess he was more or less saying, I can do what I want because you all are lynching people for even thinking about that, so I'm going to do it in your face. It was what he did, which is a little different than why guys are doing it today. But anyway, he lasted until 1915. He had to leave the country. He snuck out of the country with a Negro League baseball team, going to Canada. He made it out of the country, and because they were watching him, the FBI, so that he wouldn't leave. But he left. He went to trial on this Kennesaw, the first commissioner of baseball. He was the federal judge, and he sentenced Johnson to a jail term. He was out on bail. That's when he escaped. And what happened was he got to Europe. He had some fights there. He went all over. He ended up in Mexico, and then they made a deal with him to come to Cuba. And there's controversy around this. Did he throw the fight or not to Tex Willard in 1915? But we say he threw the fight, and there were a couple reasons. But nevertheless, he was able to come back into the country. His mother had already died. He missed her funeral, all of this. Did 1 year in Leavenworth, came out, and then he was a free man the rest of his life. Jack Johnson died in 1946 from an auto accident. Now, after that, the next black champ was the Brown Bomber, Joe Louis, who won his championship in 1937 on the south side of Chicago at the old Comiskey Park, home of the Chicago White Sox. He beat, what's his name? It'll come to me in a second. But he annihilated all of his opponents. He was champion from 1937 to 1949. And then what was the most shameful part of American history, one of, was he fought a couple of persons during World War II while he was a member of the U.S. Army. And he turned these persons over for relief efforts for people victimized by the war. The U.S. government did not write that money off, and they still charged him for those taxes, even though he signed those checks over to the relief funds. And that's why, when he retired, he had to come out of retirement. Braddock was the guy he beat for his championship in '37, Braddock. He had to come out of retirement, and he had to fight some other people when he was almost 50 years old. He was in his late 40s. He fought Rocky Marciano, one of which, and Marciano knocked him out of the ring. Marciano was saddened by it because Joe Louis was his hero growing up. But here's the point about Marciano. He finished 49-0. And when he wanted to be 50-0. And when Floyd Patterson was fighting, Floyd Patterson lost after he became championship. He lost the fight to the champion of Europe, the guy from, was it Sweden or Norway? I can't remember his name. Johansson. And so then, of course, Rocky Marciano said, I'm going to come out of retirement. I'm going to beat this guy, blah, 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 blah. Talked all this mess. And then what happened? Before he understood, Floyd Patterson had an automatic rematch. Floyd Patterson mopped the floor with that guy. And then Marciano was quiet as a church mouse. He didn't want none of Floyd Patterson because he knew he couldn't win. He knew he could beat the European, but he couldn't beat Floyd Patterson. And lastly, we come to the greatest, Muhammad Ali, who won his championship in February 1964. Look at that fight. Ali Liston won. You could count the number of times Liston hit Ali. That's how many times he missed. In fact, he threw his shoulder out of socket. That's why he couldn't answer the bell in the 7th round. Ali was the greatest. He was the fastest. He took his whole thing from Sugar Ray Robinson, who was the greatest pound-for-pound fighter, and he was dancing like Sugar Ray. Then Ali, in April '67, they took his championship away from him because he refused to go into Vietnam. Ali barely finished high school. He wasn't lying when he took that test. He just wasn't educated enough to go into the Army. But they changed his status anyway without giving him a new test because they didn't like the effect he was having on the young black children when he was a follower of Elisha Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. So what happened was he came back and fought Joe Frazier. And this was in March of 1971. This was the second battle of the century. Remember, Jack Johnson, Jim Jeffries was the first. But Johnson wasn't undefeated. Both of them were undefeated at the time. And Frazier did win by decision. No one ever knocked Muhammad Ali out, ever. And that was in Madison Square Garden. Then Ali came back and beat George Foreman in Kinshasa, which back then was Zaire. Today is, of course, Democratic Republic of Congo. And he knocked out Foreman and became champ and stayed champ until 1981. Now, Ali was ripped off by Don King, like a lot of fighters. Marvis Martin Hagler, a lot of fighters were ripped off. And it was just a real sad chapter in boxing. But however, Ali was the greatest. And we'll just say this to end. If it wasn't for them putting another 1 million of our people in prison from 1993 to 2000, and now it's about 1,200,000 or more, Not one Russian would have been champ. Those Klitschko brothers, just like Jack Johnson told Jim Jeffries, I could beat you and your brother in one day, Ali would have beat them both in one day. And there's no way you all would have ever been champs if we didn't have all of our future fighters, a whole generation in prison. So just remember that. We have the best fighters ever. We knocked all of them out in the Olympics, so that proves that. And we'll see you all next time. And this is for you, champ, Muhammad Ali. Love you, brother. Take care.